Hiya, and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where we're speaking to AJ Shome from Founthill Land Planning and Development. AJ is actually one of my very first mentees when I started a property development training business back in 2013. So since then, he's gone on to be a really successful SME property developer, and we'll be talking about the trials and tribulations that we all face in trying to get planning permission and get things built. We'll be talking about the new NPPF, grey belt, difficulties with statutory consultees, permitted development, fallback positions, and lots of the bullshit I am sad to have to say that we have to deal with, but also hopefully some of the solutions. So that's it. It's a really good one. So please also do remember to like and subscribe. Hello, mate. How are you?
Yeah, very good, mate. Yeah.
Good. All right. So, before we start, for the audience, who are you?
AJ Shome. I guess I'm one of your first, if not your first ever mentee, actually.
You are actually.
Probably over 10 years ago. And I guess consistently from that time onwards, I've done pretty much the Paul Higgs model in terms of land planning and development, finding off-market sites, tying them up, acquiring a planning consent, delivering a planning gain or a planning uplift. And then in the last sort of 5-6 years, we've been developing out those schemes that we've got the planning consents on. So I guess now we're more of a new build development company delivering sort of multi-unit schemes. The company name is Founthill, and yeah, we've got a couple of projects running at a time at the moment. So we've got 18 houses in build, just going basically out onto the open market for sale at the moment. A new project starting for 6 houses in and around Hitchin. That's completing next month, and then just yesterday we got a consent on a beautiful scheme just outside of Berkhamsted, which is it's a cracking deal. I think I've sort of mentioned it to you before, but yeah, it's a really, really lovely deal. We're really looking forward to getting our teeth into that one. But ultimately, I think our key angle is really this new tagged grey belt.
Yeah.
Brownfield, a lot of green belt stuff. So that's kind of, if you to ask us where we really specialise, that's probably the kind of space that we're in.
The whole point about this podcast, Inside Property Development, is it's designed to be a bit, educational, really, for everyone involved in the sector, right? Planners, policy makers, architects, all of the various consultants, basically everyone, right? Because it's complicated, as we know, and I would like to get into the detail of some of that. But it's particularly for SME developers. Yeah, because I, obviously been doing this a long time, probably going to retire. That's the plan again. And I really want to help support and encourage the sector because it's fucking difficult, isn't it? And you are a classic example of an SME developer. You started, 10 years ago. You didn't know what you're doing. You were brand new to it. So you are a really good example of doing it.
Yep.
Really. And actually, I do remember it was longer than 10 years, actually. I'm pretty sure it's 2013. So just for the info of people, how I started a property development training business. I did sort of semi-retire, or tried once before. I lived in Spain for a little while, actually mainly because I met a lady there. She was already there, so that's why I went to Spain. And tried to semi-retire. I got really, really bored. And I used to have lots of people coming over to me to sort their deals out for them, people I knew from the sector, yeah? And she suggested to me, you got all these people coming out, you're helping them out of all their deals and you tell them all of this stuff. What you should do a little training course. I thought, that's interesting. And I did do a little training course in Seville where I lived. And you were one of the first people that came.
Well, I actually stalked you just before that, actually, and ended up turning out in Seville about a month or two before that, and we sat with your newborn twins outside that coffee shop for 2 days, and I was it's quite a surprising insight then, because I didn't even know why I was going out there to meet you at that point in time. but
Yeah,
it just
very
opened everything up
interesting.
after that.
So
And
that
obviously
was
we got on.
so that was nearly that was been like just turning 12.
That really was 2013. I think I was off the back of some, chest beating Tony Robbins kind of thing, and ultimate power. And I just thought, and I remember we went for a curry, and it was just very different, the kind of things that you were talking about then, because you didn't say I'm a developer. You said I'm a developer, but my real sort of talent and focus is in land and planning, and that's and you were quite humble about it at the time. But I'll always remember that first ever meeting in that curry house where you sort of explained that to me. And obviously now, 10 years later, or 12 years later, it means all the more to me, because that really is still very much, it's like it's something that will ring true forevermore, I think.
Yeah, interesting.
The
So
values.
I bang on about a bit like you actually. Now you've started building stuff, because obviously you weren't to start with. That's a whole nother minefield, isn't it? And now it never used to be as hard as it is actually. So I always used to talk about land and planning because I studied construction management. I was in construction. I thought it was all about knowing how to be a builder. And as time went on, I started realizing, shit, it doesn't matter how good a builder you are. If you haven't got the right land and the right planning, none of it matters really. So I then sort of spent the rest of my career trying to make myself a bit of an expert on that. Now, interestingly, all of these years later, actually getting stuff built, certainly at the right price, and actually even finding anyone to do it is becoming a really big problem. So now actually the whole building bit is a problem as well,
I think, to be honest, everything's a problem at the moment. I don't mean to put a dampener on it, but we've been doing this a long time. Even the development pieces, it feels like we've been doing that a reasonable amount of time, and it's just never been. We do sort of run our business, and we do analyze all these different kind of metrics, or RAG status is red, amber, green, and at the moment it's the market hasn't collapsed in any way. But every other aspect around it is very challenging. Everything from finance costs are up, build costs are absolutely, astronomical, very hard to pin down.
Yeah.
Consistently planning. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about planning at some point.
Yeah.
But you see, all of these factors in the moment are kind of conspiring against us. The market as well is interesting because the prices are holding firm, but what they don't really talk about is the velocity of deals, how long it's taken, for things to go through, the length of chains. It's just, every developer at the moment seems to be in a position where they're having to look at exit finance.
I was just going to mention that, absolutely.
Right? And that's that's not coming from me. That's coming from talking to lenders, talking to, different people who are churning these things out constantly. And it's just everyone's in the same boat. Things are delayed, sales are delayed, even the build delayed. So it is an incredibly challenging time. Dare I say, a lot of it's changed since COVID.
I agree with part of that. I mean, obviously, build costs went bonkers. So, what do you think's changed since COVID?
I was going to say, in the broader economic cycle. I mean, look, we printed a ton of money to, and you should only ever really print money if it's going to create an equal or greater result in productivity in the economic system, right? So you print the money and things go up. But we kind of printed money to do the opposite, right? To keep people at home. We printed too much of it.
Yeah, let's not get onto that.
Yeah,
I'll tell you for why, because that is fucked, isn't it? I mean, the economy in general.
Slower now, right? So we've got work at home culture. We've got massive inflation. So the inflation is a direct result of that, as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe there's a bit of supply chain in that, but ultimately that is a direct consequence of it. Housing has been flat. But again, if you adjust it for inflation, it's actually fallen considerably because it's been flat, right? And everything else has gone up 20-25%. So it's there's a huge knock on, and then obviously productivity. So everything from solicitors, all of the people, the consultees in the council, all of that. I mean, it's just everything's really sludgy.
Yeah.
Right? And I've noticed that change. We can explain why. But putting the why aside, it's since that point, it's got really sticky.
Yeah. The reason I didn't want to get into that in too much detail is because actually I think the current economic system is just unsustainable and it is slowly collapsing, which is a whole nother discussion that people may or may not agree with. and we'd be here forever.
Yeah. No, it's like, Ray Dalio and Empire Cycles and things like that.
Yeah,
So
exactly,
that's
exactly.
a different ball. But then look at America.
I think we need more collaboration in the sector, particularly between planners and planning authorities and house builders and developers, because it's always been very much sort of like us and them, which is really so unhelpful. And likewise with, people that live usually locally to proposed developments. Some people call them NIMBYs. I think, in a lot of my like weirdo hippie circles I hang around in, I don't tell people I'm a property developer because I know what a lot of people think about property developers, right? And of course there are arsehole property developers. One of the reasons for doing this and starting the training thing is to get rid of those and teach people that there is a better way. Unless it's like, people like me and you actually doing it or trying to do it, a lot of things people don't understand is just how difficult it is to get stuff to stack up. But I think they think we're all making fortunes flying around in helicopters, right? And I'm not expecting anyone to feel sorry for property developers. Yeah. I think it's important that the truth is got out there. Now it's not brilliant for me. I've got a property development and training business, so and I'm talking about the fact that it's not easy and it's difficult, right? You got other arseholes out there talking about how easy it is and get rich quick and all the rest of it, which you and I know is just not true.
Right. Not if it's sustainable and the right and doing the right thing. It's as simple as that. I mean, it is a tougher time at the moment, but it's interesting when you said they were not all flying around in helicopters, because it just brought me back to this one deal it's been in planning for 2 years.
This is one of yours.
It's unbelievable. It's got literally every single aspect of it is everything that's been wrong with planning. It's only for 4 units. It's a relatively small scheme, but it's been called up constantly. And we're actually quite, there's a reasonable amount of collaboration with the LPA, the planning authority. Yeah. It's just all the different aspects of it. So the planning officer himself is quite a diligent guy. But it's all the consultees. So we've got the flood, we've got, all these different policies around sort of economic protection zones. But the reason I brought it up, I thought it was funny, is because ultimately the landowner flies around in a helicopter. So we're here sweating, and I kid you not, this has brought me close to the edge, this one, because I've never had, and sometimes when you put serious amounts of capital, and we're talking over 6 figures for 4 houses, right? That's insane amount. Yeah. Ultimately, the landowner and the people that we're dealing with, they made 19.5 million in profit last year in their business.
What is their business, just out of interest?
Well, it's a haulage and stuff, company like that. So, but the point is that they're the people that he wins either way, right? Yeah, so we get the deal through and everything, the money goes to them. We're the ones doing the work. We're the ones taking on the risk. I'm the one that, will physically stand to lose a considerable amount of money in this. And I'm having to sort of battle all of this kind of stuff. And to be honest, you've got to be thick-skinned. You've got to be relatively well-funded, whichever means that is. As in, you've got to be prepared for this, because at any point, even at this point, 2 years in, and we should have got the consent 3 months ago, and then there was a final round about the houses. We had to change the red line boundaries, had to go back out to consultation. And on this one, I kid you not, it's just 4 houses on a raised bit of land coming off quite a busy road. It's classic, right? So we're talking about brownfield first, let's promote brownfield, blah, 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 right? This is a brownfield site, clear as day. So the first problem we encountered, I'll tell you, is, well, it wasn't the first. There's obviously lots of little hurdles. However, the first major hurdle was the council's employment protection policies, that they will resist the loss of a B8 use class, so basically a storage use class. Yeah. Now, if they're going to resist that use, how does that then combine with the NPPF saying that whether in redundant or continuing use, you should be reusing land that contains brownfield land? It's completely in conflict. And the planning officer wouldn't. Fortunately, this site hadn't been used for any purposes for 30 years, right? So it's completely redundant. We had to, claim it was hobby uses. It was various other things. But ultimately, that was a major thing. Then, several other things came into it, but the worst thing of all was the flooding, right? So they've recently changed
it's flooding. On raised ground.
It's on raised ground. The access would be in surface water flooding. So you get 2 types of flooding, one from rivers, the serious one that persists and destroys houses. And I completely get it. It's ridiculous to allow developers to develop on
Fluvial,
places. Yeah, fluvial, right? So in areas like that. And also surface water can be a problem. We see it more often than not these days because, it comes up, but it's not strictly dangerous. Anyway, these are on raised ground. So the properties themselves are of no risk whatsoever of being affected by the flood. However, the access is. So to cut a long story short, because we haven't got all day, our solution to that was to basically spend over 100 grand pretty much putting a road and a public right of way, dealing with adjacent landowners to create an access to the back of that site that in a 1 in 100 year event, right, this is a 1 in 100 year event, that access becomes unaccessible by the emergency services, which they have told us they will get in anyhow. They will even bring boats in if they needed to, but irrelevant. And the comment to us was, what if somebody had a life-threatening, in that 1 in 100 year event, so it's one day in 100 years that surface water got to a lake where that access would be at. And that was literally the reason this planning application had to fail. It's the nonsense of that. And I know other areas where, because you look on the maps, surface water flooding exists on most roads in that neck of the woods, right? So it's just by chance that we had somebody who felt that was,
There's a couple of really interesting things about that. So of course we could come up with tons of technical issues like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, particularly regarding people stuck at home, like planning officers not back in the office still, right? Again, that's a whole nother conversation. But in terms of consultees, and statutory consultees and economics in general, and I've got to say, I think this is one of the problems. We all know the planning system is massively under-resourced. Big problem. Just not enough planners, and then obviously not enough really good experienced planners because they've not been getting trained, they've not been, attempted to come into the sector, and of course they can get paid a lot more in the private sector, right? So there's not enough planners, full stop. Certainly not enough good planners. Lots of the older, experienced ones are obviously have left or are leaving. And of course, the last few years, people not even being in the office, how is a younger planner actually going to learn about how it all works? It's ridiculous, right? But anyway, back to consultees.
Yeah.
So, you've got the EA, Natural England Highways Agency, loads and loads of them.
They all treat it like they're determining the application.
Exactly. Well, this is my point. But not only that, they are all also under the same pressure where exactly what I just said, there's not enough of them. There's not enough experienced ones. And I've got to tell you, this is all related to the system going tits up, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
It's a bit like potholes. Why is there potholes everywhere? Because there's not enough money to fund the stuff and fix the stuff and do the stuff that needs to be done. It's a big problem. And exactly like you say, in terms of these consultees, you get situations whereby EA or whatever, it's like computer says no, and that is it. And whereas years ago, you might have there was nowhere near as many people involved in the decision-making process years ago in terms of all of the consultees and all the boxes you've got to tick. Whereas years ago, you might have a really experienced planning officer that would actually weigh things up and actually say exactly what you just said to me. Yeah, it's 1 in 100, probably never going to happen. On balance,
that's what you need.
We need housing and everything else is good. I'll recommend it for approval, and then you'll go to committee, and then hopefully the committee will think, actually. But now, so often it's computer says no, and no one's got the balls to basically say, well, actually, on balance, I don't think that's
But this
a problem.
You're talking a brownfield site, no objections. Even we butter up the parish and we spend a good time making sure that we get something that's sensitive and correct. This is a question we ask ourselves. Why is it that a planning officer would still be minded to, in some ways it's the preference to approve, it's the presumption not in favour of development that keeps coming out. And for me, it just seems like there is a lack of individual incentive on the planning officers to put things through when it's right. And obviously there's sort of changes in the NPPF, the language, sort of presumption in favour of sort of brownfield.
I was just going to say the latest NPF as it's always been brownfield first, but it's actually beefed up.
It has
that a bit.
Do you know what?
Although interesting, sorry to cut across you.
Yeah.
Not sure to what extent, that is going to deal with the issue that you've just come up with, for example, because you still get the computer says no type thing, you know?
The other angle here is when you look at the two sort of streams of planning, you look at the permitted development rights and compared to sort of full planning applications. Why is it that a permitted development argument can be, have so many less consultees, have so much less red tape, right? So much less risk associated to it. And obviously, naturally, most people who aren't like us, who like to get really involved, because, for us, our life cycle was 2 years land and planning, 2 years development and sale, right? And that seems kind of ridiculous. Most developers out there want 3 months land and planning, which is probably what it should be, right? You buy a site, you get the planning on paper. It should take
years and years ago, it was a bit more like that.
Yeah, it isn't like that anymore. So you have to lean on. But why is there such a big disparity between permitted development and thinking? No one's addressed that. No one's sort of said, look, and obviously we have to use that in our arguments when we are doing it, which is like the fallback concept. We could change the use to sustainability, right? We've got something now. We could change a storage unit to a housing, or we could change something to housing.
But just to explain that bit to people, because it's crazy, right? The reason why is, 2012, you had Class O office to residential conversions was the first real big one in terms of PD, yeah? Mm-hmm. There has been, more and more, but generally, the commercial to residential were all the big ones, right? It wasn't really regulated enough in terms of there were no space standards, daylight, sunlight, a lot of shite got built, right? I've never really been very small. I've been very pro that stuff because it's created a lot of shit accommodation, right? And also actually attracted a lot of the worst type of developers and people into the sector that are just, there's an opportunity. They're just on the money. They don't care about the type of housing they create. They don't care about design, and it gets us all a bad name. A lot of shites got created as a result of PD, right? But from a policy point of view and governments, obviously, their thinking is, well, it's brownfield. And the other thing, because it's already there, it's already built, and you're just converting stuff, you're not building it, it's probably the most politically acceptable, right? Trying to, save the votes and not piss off the NIMBYs. Well, let's develop a load of shit, which is basically it's not all like that, but...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, central government is trying to almost like bulldoze through the problems of the planning by centrally saying what is a safe and easier way to give somebody a consent without having to go through too many hoops.
Actually,
right?
sorry, and of course the other part of that is of course it took away power from local authorities, and planners. And I've got to tell you, and this is another big thing. Sorry, I'm getting my bandwagon now. Local authorities, lots of people, certainly planners, would agree with me about shit PD. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Right. And this is really good because this comes back to the fallback position, right? They'd agree with me about, I had a really interesting conversation with someone really high profile yesterday, actually. I won't say who it is because I'll get her on here at some point and she might not want me to say. And we were having this conversation about exactly this. And the point is, if planners had been and were a bit more sensible when we were trying to do stuff, that none of that would have happened. They wouldn't have to force people down, take the planners' power away because you're not making any sensible decisions. You're just refusing everything. Yeah. You're just going with the NIMBYs. You're just like...
But that's what goes back to my point, isn't it? Which is the difference between being able to, why is there such a vast difference between... if you can get permitted development through on one hand, why is it so much more difficult to get a full planning application through for the same? Imagine it was the same, right? Yeah. You put the two in together. So someone has to look at both of those two different streams and say, if it's okay to put a permitted development scheme through, maybe just do away without the fallback. Maybe that should just be something in planning now.
I agree.
You go in and say,
Totally. And so I'm just, again, remember, I was coming on to try to explain the fallback position for people out there that might not get it, right? So let's just take an example, right? Let's just say, I don't know, you got an old, let's say, make an easy one. Right?
I'll give you one if you want. I've got one now.
Go on.
There should be, go on. So I've got a something everyone knows, a few people will know of Class Q, which is the right to convert an agricultural building into, effectively bond conversions, right? So converting old agricultural buildings that are of sufficient structural form into residential units, right? But I think the statistic is 85% of those never actually get converted, because what people then do is they say, well, look, we've now basically got the principle of residential in this dwelling. How about we come back to the table, submit a full planning application, and we will build something that's better. So it's the concept of betterment. So putting something together that might have better ecological, might have less harm on the green belt or whatever.
Well, very often it will look better because you're not trying to polish a turd, are you?
Exactly, right? But the resistance you get. So the one I've had on that, I've just had to submit 3 different variants of Class Q in order to get this fallback. I had a pre-app meeting the other day. I know I tend to do pre-apps. That's another segue of a conversation about how you do this. But that's mainly because I want the relationship with the officers and to talk it through. And there's still enormous resistance. They're still finding nuances in it because they don't like it. And Class Qs are particularly, it's one that it's quite well known for not being liked by local authorities because it affects the countryside and all the rest of it. But it's a nonsense. I've got these 2 big, ugly buildings that I want to replace with, really high quality design, really, beautiful finish, agricultural, they should be biting my hand off.
People that don't know, you might, if you can get permitted development to convert something, but actually you could knock it down and build something much better, modern standard, better regs, more sustainable. Now, I won't get into the whole nother conversation about demolition or not and carbon and all that. That's a whole nother tangent we won't go off on this one. Polish a turd, basically, and that is what it is. Convert something, wouldn't be brilliant under PD, or you could actually say, look, Mr. Planner, I can do this under PD, but how about I just knock it down and build something brand new and super sexy and it's really nice and it's much better in all respects, right? And they'll say no. So you then have to go away and get a PD consent and spend a load of time and money on that to create. Then you create a fallback position to basically say, well, look, I could do this, but how's about I do the new build thing instead? Like, why do you have to go through all that bullshit? In order to it's just crazy.
And I've done 3 of them for this one. Yes, it's a single unit, nice unit, but 3 of them. I've submitted one the other day because the initial one I put in is 2 units. And I wanted the fallback to be a lovely single unit, much better suited to the area, everything else. And they said they wouldn't support it because it's reducing the housing numbers. But it's not implemented. In one hand, they're saying, and you see what I mean?
Yeah,
so now I've gone back in again. Crazy. And I said to them, but all I have to do is just put in another Class Q application for a single unit. And it'll be, so can you not just accept that? That is part of the viable fallback that I'm going to put in. I could just put in a planning application, cost a couple £100 for a Class Q, and they wouldn't accept it. So I've had to just do it because I'm scared that I'm just going to waste yet more time. So I've submitted 3 PD planning applications for this very one point.
Yeah, it's crazy. And a few major points on that, right? So obviously you're wasting your time and money, right? But more importantly, you're wasting the local authority's time and money. They're
£200.
They're under enough pressure anyway.
Yeah.
We all know they're massively under resourced, and and at the same time they're creating problems for themselves and arguing about shit that doesn't need to be. And I could tell you the biggest problem, and I've mentioned this before, and again,
and there's no objections on this.
And I'm not trying to be, and I'm pro. One of the reasons I wanted to start this thing is to have more collaboration between us and planners, and so I'm definitely not anti-planning or anti-planners. I'm quite the opposite, actually. Look, put it this way. They're not under the pressure we're under. I mean, they haven't got their houses on the line, have they? Seriously.
No.
And we've talked about stuff, and here may or might not be the time to talk about it. But honestly, they ain't got their houses online. They go home at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, or they're probably already at home. We don't need to be making things any more difficult for each other. No,
I mean that is exactly it. And different authorities are a bit different, but you just never know.
That is a really good point just on that as well. So as you will know, and in fact, actually, when I first started my training thing, God, 12 years ago now, whatever, when you first come and do it, it was the first time I'd ever done it, right? 12 years on, I've put a lot more detail into it. I've reverse engineered it. I've created a step-by-step system and all the rest of it. And part of that system, when it comes to getting planning, is coming up with your planning strategy. And it's always different wherever you are.
Absolutely.
So the point about that you just sort of touched upon really, is you get some local authorities that are very pro-development or more pro-development, and they're great to work with, and they really want to, and at one end of the scale, you get ones that are just like totally anti-development, and it's going to be a nightmare.
Should we draw up a list and then just...
I've got a list.
I think our list would be the same, wouldn't it?
It would.
Well, we know. I mean, every borough we work with, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, we won't name and shame. But
No. We won't, but we probably should at some point. Some point, because hopefully, it's changing the new. I mean, this actually might be a good time to jump onto the new NPPF because that's I've got to tell you, talking about
So, what did you think about it?
What, the new NPPF?
Yeah. You said it hasn't go far, but nothing ever goes quite far enough. But
no, I think it's really good. So again, pretty much everyone listening to this is probably going to know what the NPPF is, but just in case anyone doesn't, the National Planning Policy Framework, so the overarching central government policy, and down below that, local authorities' development plans got to be in sort of general conformity with that. So it's like the high level rules. First one came out in 2012, which was actually was a massive, massive change. I mean, I guess so you probably weren't even doing stuff. I don't know if you remember the first one.
No, I remember we talked about it.
Well, I would have talked about it on the training.
You forced me to read it, and that was my first insight. Is this the right place?
That took, if you stacked it all up, it will probably be a lot more than that. Policies, PPGs, circulars, tons of guidance, and got rid of most of it and made it really, it streamlined everything. It was really good. It was really positive. Best bit of planning policy actually that certainly in my career that I can remember, the first 2012 NPPF, and for a few years it was great, and then of course over time it sort of got
it culminated in that Gove one just before. That was absolutely
off the scale terrible. But anyway, now December 2024 we've got a new NPPF, which I think is generally good. I'll tell you, and then you can tell me what you think of it.
Yeah.
I actually think the fact that they didn't change it too much is good. Yeah. The people, mainly people from outside the sector, talk about we need a wholesale review and we need to no, honestly, please just fuck me. Leave things alone long enough and we will sort it out, right? It's complicated, but we'll work our way around it. We'll work out how to deal with it. And we'll deal with it.
And that's the same across the whole
literally
economy,
keep changing things, moving the goalposts all the time. We don't know where we are. So the fact that it wasn't changed too much, I actually think was really good. And there was some quite subtle changes,
that's it.
That actually I think it's good. I think it's good. I mean, we'll see. Obviously the grey belt stuff is massive. The 5-year housing supply stuff is massive. The making the presumption in favour of brownfield a bit stronger. So I think it's good.
I mean, it's exactly. I'll echo all of that. I think it's the subtle changes, but when you're in this game, you actually recognise that those subtle changes, there's particular sub clauses where they've changed the word, Now you can't create substantial harm versus where before you could create no greater harm. So it just gives you suddenly leeway. So when you're presenting these arguments, which we're doing all the time, and that's what it is. I mean, it is a negotiation with the council, and actually, we sound very doom and gloomy, but our success record is extremely high. We get everything through that we do, and obviously experience plays into that a little bit. But understanding the difference, it's the two things, isn't it? It's the policy and the people. So if I've always had a good career of working with people. I've been in sales historically, and so the people aspect is a bit that I tend to work with. But then obviously you get the type of person that hangs a lot on policy. So this change to the NPPF is kind of given us for the people who are really stringent on policy, is giving us just a lot more flexibility, and it's quite flexible, whereas before, particularly in Greenbelt's way over restricted in areas which, like agricultural or brownfield or your own dwelling. So people who've even got houses in the Greenbelt could feel that restriction when they want to do something. And, is it in the curtilage? Is it not? Is it this? There's a huge emphasis. But the reality is that there is stuff in the Greenbelt. You should be flexibly allowed to grow that and develop that. We're not talking about wiping over, on the 5 key purposes of the Greenbelt, which obviously we don't need to go into, but it's not really having any impact on that. But previously, the planners could say it was, because it has any harm.
I think that's, and again, hopefully, the majority of people listening to this probably know exactly what we're talking about, but might be people that don't, that don't. And, do you know what the cleverest thing about the grey belt was? Calling it the grey belt.
Yeah, it is. Well, I've been doing grey belt for 12 years, Paul.
Calling it that?
No, but that's what we do.
So
we haven't called it grey belt, but that is literally our company's primary focus. But obviously, we've spun it, we've changed it, and as you say, the marketing term grey belt makes it a lot softer.
Yeah. So the problem is, up until December 24, when grey belt became a real thing. Yeah, I don't need to tell you, you would have had massive problems just because of the fact it's green belt.
Yeah. Big ugly factories, breakers' yards.
You've seen my latest one. I mean, Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
At some point, we'll have that on there, and I'll show people the before and the after, and they will literally, I would imagine, be blown away in terms of Jesus Christ. That's green belt, and this is the thing, and it's been a big part of the issue is lots of the general public, they should say, assume that green belt is all forests and fields and beautiful landscapes, which absolutely we should not be developing, right? But there's lots of land within the green belt that is pretty shite. I mean, my one's an off-the-scale example in terms of covered in buildings, etc.
Get me to throw a couple of examples in as well.
What of your ones?
There's some stuff that you will see is unbelievable. How it's burning fires.
I bet you can't have anything worse than my one, surely.
Oh, way worse.
Well, really? That's worse than that.
Well, we'll put it. We'll
have a competition.
Yeah, we will do.
Most diabolical sites in the green belt.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but we've got a database of that. That's what I promise you. It's the resistance. I mean, the one that we had once was in a conservation area. It was a builder's yard. The project that we did in Flamstead, I think.
I saw that. Yeah, I went to that one. Yeah.
That was
that green belt?
It was green belt, absolutely.
Was it?
It's green belt. It wasn't washed over, so it wasn't. So basically, it was in a conservation area. Yeah. And the resistance that we got, the parish, everyone was up in arms about it. It was literally a horrible builder's yard, abandoned. Yeah. People used to come in there burning fires. Everything was falling down. It was a complete, and we built basically conservation area spec, beautiful heritage housing in there. And you look at it today compared to how it wasn't. It's like, how did this come against so much resistance? It's absolutely mental, and it does.
Well, do you know what? Actually, that brings us on to something else really, really important, because the answer is to that question is, and this is one of the big problems with planning and development in general. Human nature is people just don't like change. I had a site in Acton in West London, big long site. It was a furniture maker's, 4 stories, corrugated, been there for years. Immediately backing on to residential gardens, and they were only quite short gardens, and they were nice Victorian houses, right? And so it shouldn't have been there, right? It was a non-conforming use. It was just historic. It just happened. It was there because it'd been there forever, right? In the middle of the town centre, right? And people have been going bonkers forever trying to get rid of it, right? Obviously, lots of lorries, traffic coming and going, racket from all the machines and stuff. I tied the site up, submitted a plan application for 40 odd flats. People went ballistic, petitions, placards, and all the rest of it, right? Eventually won it at appeal, built it, got letters from people, they loved it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, do you know what I mean? So the whole point, it's the change. It's they assume the worst. And one of the reasons they assume the worst It's because there are, or not so much now, but arsehole developers that build shite and that people don't want. So again, so that was the main reason for starting the training thing and starting this, is to get rid of those, because none of that doesn't help any of us, and it doesn't make any of us look good. And it doesn't have to be that way. You know, there are good developers, there is good development. And the sooner, well, not only that, the sooner people know that, but more importantly, the sooner people start doing more of that, you know, the easier it will get.
Let's take a sideways on that, because that I hear you on that, but at the same time, it is so tight at the moment when it comes to build costs and everything else. How do you judge? Because actually, you know, for example, that scheme we talked about in Flamstead, really beautiful heritage design, very costly to build a lot of that.
Yeah.
Now things are getting very, very squeezed, because we're finding this now, quite honestly, can we build for the same level of quality and specification as we did previously? So that's a, you know, and I get it, because I always want to deliver a good product, right?
Yeah.
It's just inherent. That's part of the reason I do this. But at the same time, you've got to make it work. And it's very, very difficult at the moment with the build cost prices and everything else. So obviously you can get the design right. That's fine. That's a big part of it. But often design does come with an additional cost. So what do you think about that?
So I'll tell you the answer to that, in my opinion, and I'll tell you how planners, right, and committees can really help with this, right? Only people like you and me and other developers at the coalface negotiating with landowners to try to come up with a number that they're going to accept, yeah? And then obviously, you know, spend fortunes trying to get planning, then obviously funding it, building it, hopefully selling it. So, you know, that's all taking way longer than we'd like at the moment, right? Only we really know how tight things are from a viability point of view. You do get refused. You do have to appeal. You do have to submit a stupid application so you can generate a fallback position when you didn't, you know, all of the additional delays and costs that get put on us means we've got even less to play with. Look, all development should be good, right? But if super good development was really like fast tracked, you know, then the savings could all be spent on even better design. That just makes things even more difficult.
Absolutely, of course it does. But I guess also there is this thing of, I mean, you go back to the Victorian ages. Could we even build a house like that today? Could we technically build as beautiful houses as we did 100 years? Like incrementally, we are moving more and more towards, you know, simpler, cheaper design because of the squeeze, the cost of labour and everything else. So how do you address that? Like,
well, look, I mean, again, this is really interesting. This comes back to where we started about how construction is so important. You know, for I mean, look, it was always important. Obviously, you've got to build things as quickly and as efficiently and as good quality as possible. That's always been the case, obviously. But now, as development and everything is under even more financial pressure, so that's where, you know, there's big talk about modern methods of construction and all the rest of it. So that's a big part of it. We won't get too much into that because that's a whole nother podcast. You know, it's even more important that you understand building and construction now. And so the best way to do things, probably more important than it's ever been, because there's even more pressure on costs. Modern methods of construction is part of it. Speeding up the whole process so we're not hammered as much by unnecessary planning fees and delays is a big one.
Conditions as well in that, you know.
All of that, planning conditions, all of it.
An extra month on site, they don't realise that can be 70 grand at the end of the project.
Exactly.
You know, it can be these things are
honestly. So exactly. So you know, unless it's you know, people that won't believe it, and I think they think, you know, we're lying all the time, don't they? It's all developers, you know. They're just making fortune. And
I'm sure you'll be all right, you know. Will we? You know,
well, look. Yeah, big thing I talk about is you know, SME developers. You look at the graph. I've probably talked about it lots. You know, peak developers about 12,500. Last time the survey was done that I saw, 2017, gone down to 3,000. So you've gone from 12,500 SME developers in, I think it was 1988. It was actually, because I talked about that was the year, but I built my first single new build house when I was 21, which just coincided with this chart. 1988 was the peak of SME house builders, smaller house builders and developers, Last survey they did 2017, I think it went down to about 3,000. I haven't seen the survey for quite a few years. I guarantee you it will be even less than that now. And the reason is, people think, well, if it's easy and developers, we're all making fortunes, all the rest of it, the chart would have been going the other way, and also housing supply would have been going the other way as well. The fact that not many people are doing it is they are getting squeezed out the market, and they're going bust.
If we weren't doing land and planning first, as in we weren't. I say I run a land and planning business rather than a developer. If we weren't doing that, we wouldn't be in business today, for sure. And we analyse that all the time.
Well, look, I told you that at the beginning, didn't I?
You did tell us that,
and I tell everyone at the beginning is you got to find and tie up sites at a sensible price, and that means 100% off market. And then you've got to add maximum planning and design value to them. That is basically the answer. Being a good builder. That's where they'll up until 1988. On that little chart. Historically, developers, they were just good builders. They might build 10, 20, 50, couple of hundred homes a year.
Well, a third, wasn't it? Back in 33%.
Well, do you know what?
For just picking a site up.
That is an interesting point. That reminds me, I'll tell you something really interesting in a minute. If you look at the percentage of land value to GDV is an interesting metric, right? When I first sort of got into new build, I started off doing refurbs and gradually bigger things, right? So I told you, 1988, I built my first new build house, right? And around that time, that's when I sort of started getting into more land and planning stuff, Typically, and historically, my sort of patch has been London and mainly London actually, and the home counties, right? So high value areas, Typical percentage land to GDV was about 40-45%. And it used to be now and then, if you were really hot for something, it might start getting towards 50%.
I've seen 50%.
Now that was an usually indication of things are getting, actually, this is all getting a bit too steamy, right? At that, right? But remember that this was like 25, 30 years ago, And basically what's happened is time has gone on and development costs have gone up. And this is the thing, a lot of people don't realise this. There's a lot more Section 106 now than there ever was, right? Affordable housing, Circular 698, right, was a big one when it really started changing, right? Before that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't provide it. We should provide it. It's a really important thing, right? But, Section 106, affordable housing, less funding for affordable housing, SIL, community infrastructure levy, basically land tax, didn't exist. BNG, a more recent one, and just finance costs, development costs. All that is all additional costs that the land has to pay for that didn't exist before.
And planning costs
absolutely. 30 years ago, you'd probably spend $5,000 on a planning application and get it in 3-6 months, and that was it. Not too many planning conditions. You just go and get on with it. Now, you just said, look, my one, $300,000 for 4 houses, and 5 years to get planning. And before that, the people were trying to get planning for 35 years. So my latest site had a 40 year history of planning refusals. Before I eventually got planning to build 3 houses, and it costs pretty much $300,000 in planning. That's how crazy things are. But the point is, so now, typically, I would say, I'd be interested to see what you say. And remember, it's different in different parts of the country. So the ratio between end values and development costs is very different in different parts of the country. But, as I just mentioned, I'm sort of talking about London and the home counties. It's more like 25% now.
If you were selling a site, it's difficult for us because obviously we strictly only do off-market complicated planning. So we are still doing deals. So whilst this conversation has been, all about everything that's wrong, I can honestly say from our company's point of view, we're still doing very healthy deals. And the only reason for that is because we're finding opportunities that aren't opportunities and creating opportunities out of them. We're finding creative ways, because it has to be creative to get through the planning system or get more on something than was there already. So we are, like, you talk about adding value. We absolutely add value because the developments that are there on the ground today that we've done wouldn't have been there without us. And I'm pretty confident that I can say that. So the offshoot of that is that we're not just going along looking at the States Gazette and Rightmove for land with planning or, other things like that. So when we buy a site, we often tie it up at quite a reasonable rate because ultimately the landowner's expectations are lower because they've either had multiple refusals or it's land in the green belt or it's designated in a certain way. But we, through experience, have just found, we've taken a risk. Sometimes it is a bit of a risk, but we lean towards that. So from our point of view, I mean, we've literally done as low as 12% of GDV, actually, in the past. What we're finding is 25% is probably about where you sell, and we can still pick things up for around 20%. But you don't know what planning outcome's going to be.
I know there are people out there that don't know what they're doing. Lots of people out there that don't know what they're doing that will actually go and try to agree land deals based on the percentage to GDV. So they'll look at like, we could get 10 houses on there and sell them at £1 million and 30% of GDV. Right, £3 million is the land value. But there are, you and me know that is 100% not how it works.
Oh yeah,
that is a recipe for disaster. So I only make that point because I know that there are people that pick up on the percentage thing and think that that's how you do it. That is totally not how you do it. The percentage
thing is just
it's just a useful little metric and indication. In my 30 years doing land and planning stuff and new build stuff, land values are nearly halved.
Yes, definitely.
Based on all of the additional costs and everything, which is one of the things that makes stuff unviable, right? Landowners, certainly if it's got anything on it and it's got an existing use value, they aren't going to sell unless you're paying them at least existing use value.
I moan a lot about this, but every time we ever talk, there's usually a moan about something. If it wasn't so bloody complicated,
I agree.
We probably wouldn't be in the business that we're in. Because otherwise we're just almost like a commodity developer. If it was easy and sites were out there and we're just building, constantly like any sort of developer would like to do. But the issue with us is we've chosen that slightly uncertain path, but it comes with a bigger upside. And I think that's the only way now, because the other way of doing it, the margins are realistically getting very, very squeezed.
What's the other way of doing it?
The other way of doing it is bidding amongst everyone and trying to basically...
Oh yeah, well again, like I told you when we first met, that is commercial suicide, really. If you're buying sites for planning, one you better be a absolute shit hot builder, so you can build it exactly the right price. There's no messing around. You get it done for what you think you're going to get it done for.
I think that can be a thing, because when we sold sites before, we've seen that. And
there's two parts of this. You've got to be a shit hot builder, and this is what normally happens. You've got to hope the market goes the right way, because that's usually what gets you out of the shit. And actually, when where you might end up with an all right margin.
100% agree with that. I mean, that is literally it. That is the game. Is that if you're not doing it, adding value in other areas, ultimately what you're doing is betting on the market being positive. And invariably, if you look at the market, it is more often than not, it's like the stock market and all other sort of investment markets, it is generally positive a lot of the time.
I think you're a little bit more of a gambler and speculator than me. Do you think?
It's hard to put a pin on it, right? Because what got me started was a bit of that. But the level of risk averseness now that I have in my kitty is, that's been put on me rather than being natural. My natural inclination is, sort of more entrepreneurial, go out there, I can fix any problem and we will get, But over the last few years, you've got to protect the downside, and that's the first and only thing that ever comes into anything for us now is looking at the downside. So that has changed a lot. But ultimately, the housing. What I mean by that is that housing does tend to move in an upward position, but then we've had a tough couple of years now, right? For a very specific reason. Housing hasn't fallen through the floor. We haven't had a major crash since sort of 2008, really, but we've had some pretty big political issues and things going on, which you would think. I remember Brexit. I remember calling you up crying, actually, when Brexit happened, and you were cool as a cucumber, I will add. But I just thought that was the end of, all this money that we'd put in and everything else, everything was going to fall apart. But it didn't. It kept moving. It was forgiving. And even this current blip, interest rates, I don't even know what the multiple is, but going up to where they are at that point in time, the market is still moving. It hasn't collapsed. It hasn't, so that's still, again, pretty forgiving. But you are seeing a lot of people getting into trouble who are doing deals where they haven't added any other value other than I can just build this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what you are seeing in this instance. So from our point of view, our margins are taking a hit for sure. Absolutely, right? Things are taking longer to sell. The build costs got everything, but it hasn't blown us over, at a time like this. And that's for me, that's the most important thing about doing this is that you've got to make sure that you do safe deals.
You have. I mean, which is probably a good place to end, because you're absolutely right. Again, I bang on about it. It really is. I found out the hard way, and it's why I started doing it the way I do it, and telling people like you about it. It really is. You've got to find proper off-market sites. You've got to tie them up at sensible value, so you're never paying too much for land, and then you are adding maximum planning value and design value by coming up with the very best scheme. That is really the answer, because then you're effectively creating an insurance policy. If things do go up, then fantastic. That's how you get your super profits. If they do go a bit sideways, then, well, hopefully you'll still be okay because you've tied it up on the right terms and you've added a lot of value before you've started. That, in my opinion, really is the key to development.
Hear, hear.
Very good. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together, we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.